Recently, we've seen some leaked photos of John Lithgow filming as Dumbledore on a beach. Now, I can't think of any moments early on in the books where Dumbledore would even be near a beach, so to me, it says that HBO isn't going to be afraid to make some new additions to the story, as well as reshuffling certain events. And honestly, I think that's kind of exciting. There have already been a lot of leaks that show that the series is staying faithful to the books, and including some scenes that the movie missed out, but this new leak also shows that they're going to be willing to expand and reimagine certain moments. And that's exactly what I plan to do for this episode, and I'll explain more about that later on. But for now, let's jump straight into my vision for Harry Potter Season 3, Episode 2, Talons and Tea Leaves. Episode 2 opens with a wide shot of platform 9 3/4, the day after the climax from the previous episode. As the Weasleys load their trunks onto the train, Mr. Weasley pulls Harry aside and goes to warn him about Sirius Black trying to find him and kill him. But before Arthur can finish, Harry interrupts him and says that he already knows. I love this small change from the movie as it shows a more caring side of Harry. He's protective of Mr. Weasley here and doesn't want him to risk his position at the Ministry by saying too much. The camera then follows the trio as they get on the train and head down it trying to look for an empty compartment when they finally find one with a man sleeping inside it, Professor Lupin. As they sit down and the train begins to move, I want to include a good bit of foreshadowing here. Ron rummages through his bags and accidentally sets off the sneakoscope, which starts spinning and whistling just as Scabbers begins to move. It's such a subtle but clever touch, essentially warning us all that something mischievous is happening right under our nose, but Ron plays it off perfectly by saying the sneakoscope is just cheap and probably doesn't work properly. The Dementor sequence is something that the movie's absolutely nailed in my opinion, and I don't really think there's a lot that we need to do here. The tension, the sound design, and the eerie atmosphere as the door slides open were just perfect. The only real difference will be including the moment where Neville and Ginny arrive as the lights all go out. It gives both characters more presence this season and just builds upon the larger Hogwarts community, not just the trio against the world. When the door slides open and the Dementor appears, once again, I'll just keep it very, very similar to what we got in the movie, although potentially there'll be a slightly different design of the Dementor just to make it a little bit more unique. Like in the movie, Harry collapses, hearing the echo of a screaming woman, and the screen cuts to black before we fade back in warmly and we see Lupin's smiling face over Harry, offering him chocolate. From here, the episode transitions to the arrival at Hogwarts as the trio walk into the entrance hall, and Ron and Hermione inform Harry about everything that happened on the train, with Lupin shooting something large and silver at the Dementor. This is slightly different from the movie, as in the movie we saw Lupin doing this, but obviously at this moment Harry had fainted. Essentially, Harry didn't see any of it, and as I've mentioned before, I do want the series to kind of follow the book example of telling most of the things that happen to Harry from his point of view. It would also make the reveal of the Patronus later on in the season a lot more dramatic and wondrous. Before they make their way into the Great Hall, Professor McGonagall intercepts Harry and Hermione and calls them into an empty chamber just off the entrance hall. Madame Pomfrey is already there and she starts fussing over Harry and telling him that he needs rest and relaxation, perhaps in the hospital wing for the night. Harry insists he's fine, but McGonagall wants to know everything that happened about the Dementor, and after Harry tells her, she then is happy to dismiss him and says that she now needs to speak to Hermione. The inclusion of this moment is a perfect opportunity to provide a few more breadcrumbs regarding the time turn. The movie hinted hinted at it, but the book planted those clues much earlier on and far more deliberately. And I'd want the show to follow suit with far more hints and comments and moments that only make sense in hindsight. We then transition to the Great Hall for the welcome feast, and as the camera glides past all of the house tables, we focus on Dumbledore as he rises to make his speech. He welcomes everybody back before introducing Professor Lupin as the new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, and tells everybody that Hagrid is going to be the new Care of Magical Creatures teacher. Finally, Dumbledore's tone darkens as he informs everybody that the Dementors will be stationed at Hogwarts this year. The camera pans across uneasy faces before we focus on Harry in a lingering shot, before we cut to black to end sequence 1. Before we go on, please remember to hit the subscribe button if you're enjoying this season, and remember to like the video and hit the notification bell so you're updated when I bring out more episodes for my vision for Season 3 of Harry Potter. Sequence 2 will cover Harry's first day of the new term, and it's a pretty action-packed one with 2 major classes. I think the movies did an excellent job with covering the classes that this sequence will cover, and it did it all in about 10 minutes. This sequence will probably be about 20 minutes long, so it will be very similar to what we got in the movie with just some additions here and there. So what I will do is go over the class and just kind of mention what I will be adding, as I won't really be taking anything away. Before we get into the classes, however, we do get the moment with the trio getting lost on their way to divination and coming across Sir Cadogan, who initially, after trying to fight the trio, says,
"Come, follow me, dear friends, and we shall find our goal, or else shall perish bravely in the charge."
And we have a brief frantic scene of the trio chasing Sir Cadogan through the castle as he bursts through different portraits on his way to the North Tower. There is a lot to cover in this episode, so this wouldn't be too long, maybe only a couple of minutes, but I do really want Sir Cadogan to play a pretty prominent part in this season. We then move on to divination with Professor Trelawney, and the main addition of this class will be that Trelawney makes a few other predictions to other students, such as telling Neville,
"After you've broken your first cup, would you be so kind as to select one of the blue patterned ones? I'm rather attached to the pink."
And she also says that
around Easter, one of our number will leave us forever.
She will also tell Lavender Brown that the thing she is dreading will happen at the beginning of November. This is slightly different from what she says in the book, for a reason I will get into later. These moments just allow there to be more character development for Trelawney, and it leads the class and the audience to be slightly undecided on whether or not she is a fraud, as Neville does actually go on to break his cup. The rest of the class is then very similar to the movie, with them looking at the tea leaves, Professor Trelawney looking in Harry's cup and seeing the Grim, which is an omen of death. We then move into Care of Magical Creatures, but before we do so, we see the trio making their way to the Forbidden Forest, discussing the events of divination. Now, in the book, they go to Transfiguration next, with McGonagall telling them all that Professor Trelawney always predicts the death of a student, but no one has actually died yet. I've decided to cut this for pacing reasons, especially because we don't actually see the class in the book, but instead we will have Hermione telling Harry and Ron that she heard this from McGonagall already, and she'll also go on to explain how she doesn't like divination and how arithmancy is better, and Ron goes on to question how she's already had arithmancy as she's been with them all morning. This is yet another breadcrumb. But essentially this conversation will give us all of the information that the book gave us, whilst also saving a little bit of time for more important things later on. The Care of Magical Creatures class will once again be very similar to the movie, and it will last for about the same amount of screen time as well. It does have some additions, such as the rest of the class interacting with different hippogriffs after Harry's flight. However, in order to combat this moment taking more time, Harry's actual flight on Buckbeak will only last about 30 seconds as he just flies around the paddock like in the book. And as Malfoy, Crabbe, Goyle and Pansy Parkinson are tending to Buckbeak, Malfoy insults the hippogriff, who rears up and slashes his arm. And once again, with my vision of the series having a slightly higher age rating, we will see a splatter of blood, unlike the movie which just showed Malfoy's robes being ripped. Hagrid picks up the screaming Malfoy, strides towards the camera before we cut to black to end Sequence 2. Sequence 3 of this episode is one that will require a little bit of reshuffling of events in order to end on a massive cliffhanger, however being done in such a way that doesn't massively impact the story. The first section of the sequence will be Professor Lupin's first Defense Against the Dark Arts class and the Boggart lesson. And there will be a fair few additions here, although to be honest, the movie scene is absolutely iconic, and I think most Harry Potter fans would agree that this scene is an absolute highlight from any Harry Potter film. In the book, there is a potions class first, with Snape doing his usual bullying of Harry and Neville, but I have decided to cut this as there will be plenty of other occasions where we will see a potions lesson in this season, and there is still a fair amount to cover in this sequence. Before we get to the Boggart lesson itself, the students arrive at the DADA classroom and Lupin tells them it will be a practical lesson and to follow him. The camera follows Lupin and the Gryffindors as they make their way through the castle towards the staff room, which is an area we have already seen in the series. On their way, they come across Peeves, and we get the incredible moment from the book where Lupin casts a spell to shoot a wad of chewing gum out of a keyhole and straight up Peeves' nostril. This is another small moment that provides us with deeper world building and more character development for Lupin this time, showing that he still carries some of those more mischievous traits from his youth. Once the class enter the staff room, we get a brief conversation with Professor Snape where he goes on to insult Neville, which is then the catalyst for the upcoming Boggart scene. Once again, the scene in the movie is absolutely iconic in both its contents and its style, and it will be interesting to see if HBO decide to keep this kind of tone and style, just like the Fantastic Beasts movie did when we saw Dumbledore teaching the same lesson. The actual events of the scene will mainly be fleshed out from what we saw in the movie, with us seeing both ones that were included, such as Snape in Neville's grandmother's clothes and Ron's giant spider, and ones that were left out, like Parvati's mummy, Seamus's banshee, and Dean's severed hand. Once again, the inclusion of these moments not only expands the wizarding world into introducing us to more dark creatures, but also enhances character development for a lot of the side characters, showing insight into their different fears. And just like in the movie, when Harry steps up to face the Boggart, Lupin jumps in front of him, the Boggart turns into a silvery orb before Lupin flicks his wand and the Boggart becomes a balloon. The scene ends with Neville facing the Boggart one more time. We see a brief glimpse of Snape in that green dress before Neville shouts with laughter and the Boggart explodes. However, as everyone is cheering, the camera pans to Harry's face and we see him looking disappointed and confused. As we slowly zoom in on Harry's face, the screen crossfades into the first of this season's Hogwarts changing motifs, highlighting the change into October and Halloween. Now, in the book, there are a few events that happen first, such as a Quidditch training session, Lavender receiving news about her rabbit, and Crookshanks chasing Scabbers. Don't worry, I will be including all of these moments, but not just yet. There's no real need for these moments to happen right now, and this episode is pretty packed. So I've decided to reshuffle events ever so slightly without it affecting the flow of the story. We cut to Halloween morning, with Harry waking up in a gloomy mood as the rest of the Gryffindors excitedly get ready to go to Hogsmeade. Harry tries to hide his disappointment as Ron and Hermione tell him they'll bring him loads of sweets from Honeydukes, and we follow them through the castle as they arrive at Filch, checking everyone's permission slips in a line, and we see Malfoy throwing insults at Harry. Once the others leave, Harry aimlessly walks through the castle and bumps into Professor Lupin, who invites him into his office for a cup of tea. Here we get an absolutely lovely scene from the book, with Lupin and Harry sharing a really close bonding moment, with Lupin showing Harry the Grindylow, gently teasing him about the tea leaf reading, and offering insight into Harry's character whilst talking about the incident with the Boggart. As I said, it's a great moment of connection between the two, but then it suddenly gets tense when Snape arrives, carrying a smoking potion. Harry, not so subtly, tries to warn Lupin about Snape, saying,
"Some people reckon he'd do anything to get the Defense Against the Dark Arts job."
However, Lupin essentially ignores Harry and goes on to drink the potion anyway. And this potion is yet again a wonderful clue into Lupin's condition. We then move into the climax of the episode as we cut to the Halloween feast, which once again will be a visual masterpiece, and we will see Ron and Hermione pushing a ton of sweets into Harry's lap and telling him all about Hogsmeade. The sequence ends as the Gryffindors head up to the Gryffindor common room, but as they arrive, they see that the fat lady's portrait has been slashed to pieces. Dumbledore and the teachers arrive, and as they are examining the portrait, Peeves arrives. Dumbledore goes on to question Peeves, who gleefully says,
"Nasty temper he's got, that Sirius Black."
We cut to black, and the credits roll. I think this episode perfectly balances the wonder of returning to Hogwarts, but also the tension around Sirius Black. It also gives us our first real look into Lupin's warmth as a teacher, expands on Trelawney's eccentricity, and also shows a deeper insight into Hagrid and his experience as a teacher. The episode also ends on a massive cliffhanger with the fat lady's portrait being destroyed, marking the true start of this season's tension. Please let me know in the comments what you think of this episode and what you would change in your version. And again, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you're updated when I bring out my vision for Harry Potter Season 3, Episode 3.